Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Passions. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Philip Nelson. So Philip, without further ado, tell us who you are and what your passion is.
Well, my name's Philip Nelson. I wear many hats. So I work within executive search, so human capital, talent, leadership management. They're all areas of particular interest to me. I am also very interested in the human condition, and I currently serve as a trustee of 3 national charities, which helps to build my passion within those areas.
When you look back, can you remember a time when you started to feel, I suppose, what you might call empathy and an interest in the human condition? Is it something that you were conscious of at school, or was there an incident or a situation, or was it gradual? How did it all come about, do you think?
I often think that those people have the most successful careers and enjoy their careers the most are often people who have actually fallen into their profession, that there's been actually no overriding plan or strategy in terms of getting there. And I think there are a few key milestones, certainly in terms of my life, which has prepared me for the life that I lead today. And I think probably one of the key foundations was where I grew up. So I grew up in a small village in Norfolk on a farm. I'm 55 now, so I grew up in an age when kids actually went to the local playing field. They didn't spend their whole time in playing with video games and digital and online, etc., and things such as that. So children were allowed to be children. And I think also we're in an economic situation where both parents didn't have to go out to work. So in terms of the interaction with parents and being brought up, you had that stronger foundation, which I know that unfortunately lots of children don't always have today. And I think that gives you a certain degree of confidence as you progress through your career. I think also being brought up on a farm in a rural community, you knew everybody in your village. You were talking to adults from an early age. We used to have gypsies or travelers come to the farm annually to pick the fruit. The Fens is a great fruit growing area. So you used to meet people from all walks of life. And also, I come from a family which has been involved in public service for, probably about 500 years. I guess my most famous ancestor is Lord Nelson. But apart from that, for a 150-year period, members of my family were clergy. So there was always that work in the community, that engagement, etc. And I think growing up with those influences around you probably gives you a certain degree of confidence and resilience moving forward. I think that at that time in the 1980s, it was high growth. I would do so many things very differently now if I could live my life over again. And at 55, it can get very frustrating if you think about everything that you'd actually wish that you'd done. But in the 1980s, I was being pushed to go to university and study for accountancy. I wish I'd have studied for a degree that I was in a subject that I really enjoyed: archaeology, history, political science. You only get one opportunity to go to university and do a first degree. Why did I choose accountancy? Why at the age of 18 or 19 did I think that my life ambition was to become a chartered accountant? Now, I'm not knocking anybody who is a chartered accountant because it's a wonderful profession, but I wish I'd have actually thought more broadly in terms about what makes me happy. And I think that young people conditioned to think we need to think about a career, we need to think about building an asset base. But I think if you make the right decisions through life, you will get those things. We all aspire to own our own home, etc., to have a successful career, to make sure that our children have a much better life than we have, etc. But I think you only get one shot at this life, so you need to, follow your passions and see where that leads. And I went into a career in accountancy after university, and I wasn't particularly happy. It was a means to an end. And this recruitment consultant phoned me up and said, we've got this wonderful job we'd like to talk to you about. Could you come and talk to us this lunchtime? And it was to become a recruitment consultant. And I never saw myself as a sales or marketing individual. And that's basically what a recruitment is. It's another sales role. And I was so unhappy where I was working that I decided, well, this can't be bad. If the right role comes up, I'll be in the right place and I can look at this as a short-term move. And sort of 30 years later, I'm still working within recruitment. And there have been, several stages of my evolution in recruitment. So I started off doing junior recruitment, then more senior recruitment. I became a trustee for the first time 20 years ago. And that excited my passion in terms of the social sector, the voluntary sector, these pool of volunteers up and down the country and charities which are doing good works. And we probably saw through the pandemic at a local community level just how important those voluntary sector and community sector organisations were to communities. So that excited my interest. And then about 12 years ago, I became a search consultant, a headhunter within this space. And I've always been interested in issues to do with social justice in terms of mobility, raising aspirations. And I guess what I've witnessed over the last 12 years is to work with some fantastic charities, which are all lightly resourced, but doing fantastic work and raising aspirations and providing opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise have opportunities. And I think that that's given me the release that I need, with that focus on the fact that I am interested in people, I am interested in the human condition, and so that I feel that I've probably quite fortunate at 55 to be in a position where I actually enjoy the work that I do. I probably work more hours than I should because I'm passionate about it. And also I see the good, the impact that my work has. And I think that we all go through that stage of building an asset base, probably working in the commercial world. We then reach that midlife crisis, which I've probably been through and gone through and come out the other side. And you'd suddenly decide, well, actually, what do I want to do with my life? What actually drives me? I've got the home, I've got the car, I've got the kids, what do I want? It's about me now. What do I want to do? And I think that, it would be good if people could actually understand their passion earlier in their career, because I think it would also help their career trajectory as well.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. And I can relate to so much of what you've said there, actually. Excuse me. I can relate to so much what you've said there. And I was in the similar kind of situation where I went through the corporate routine, if you like, the next car, the next big salary, the next role, and so on, the next step up the ladder, greasy pole, all that kind of stuff. And then I certainly, I think it was about 40, and I kind of stopped and thought, is this it? You work hard and you strive and you think, is this it? Obviously, you obviously speak to a lot of people with particular reference maybe to people who are thinking about changing careers or have got that at least in the back of the mind, if not in the forefront of the mind. Have you got a feel for why you think so many people, you possibly slightly more senior age, I guess, are so unfulfilled in their work? Is it the leadership in the organizations? Is it the politics in the organizations? Is it all of the above? Well, what do you think are the drivers?
I think it's all of the above. I think in terms of the corporate world, what we are seeing is that the corporate world is almost falling over itself to demonstrate its social credentials. So I think there's suddenly been a sea change where it's been talked about for quite a long time, whether it's things to do with climate change or whether it's to do with, the supermarkets are doing some really good work in terms of recruiting the homeless to work in their supermarkets and stores, etc., and understanding their social responsibility. And I think often it takes years and years of lots of talking, then suddenly there's a tipping point. And I guess one of the things about the pandemic is I think we've again seen a significant shift in terms of how corporates look at their social responsibility. And I think we'll, customers now are wanting to, if they go to the local supermarket or where they buy their clothes from, that they're ethically sourced, that they treat their employees well, but they're also are socially responsible as well. So I think we are seeing that in the corporate world to such an extent that we've not actually seen before. I think also people can be so tunnel focused on their career that they don't necessarily get the opportunity to network as broadly as they potentially do. And I'll give you an example. I mean, LinkedIn is the main business platform, social media platform for people working in business. But the whole premise of LinkedIn was that actually you knew your connections. They were connections because you could actually, you knew them, they were credible individuals, where people now actually accept LinkedIn, requests from almost anybody that they won't even ever meet. And so I think that, people are thinking now about, especially through the pandemic, when we've almost been under house arrest, haven't we? We haven't been able to engage, and that's probably not a good thing for our mental health. We all need, as humans, we all need social interaction, etc. And I think people have probably thought for a long time, well, what's life about? What do I want to achieve? And not necessarily in terms of legacy, because in terms of what people achieve in 10 or 20 years after we've gone, nobody will remember anyway. So unless we do something fairly dramatic, but it's about, I think, personal fulfillment. And, are we satisfied at where we are? And I think that what I do see is a lot of people who, they work to survive. And is that good for the human condition? Probably not. And I also appreciate that for a lot of people, that's the status quo. That we've had. If you look from the end of the Second World War, we've almost created an underclass in this country, which successive governments, whether they're red or blue, haven't really addressed. And I think we're all hoping that the world is going to be a fairer and kinder place coming out of the pandemic. I know that we're on the verge of World War III probably, but we were hoping things were actually going to get better, and I'm sure they will, because I think things like a pandemic or war do shift the narrative forward quite significantly, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's very true. And what I've noticed is that I think the whole oligarch conversations, we're recording this just as we're in the middle of the horrendous things that are happening in Ukraine, and all the stories around the oligarchs and the wealth, 15, 16, 20, 30, 40 billion. And then you've got people who are not going to be able to afford to put the gas on and the gulf between the rich and the poor, if you like, it's really brought it home to me on another level, in a sense. That whole kind of difference in people's wealth. I've been more right than I've been left in my politics. But to be fair, this whole thing has made me think about, has it gone too far? Has capitalism, maybe it's the best system in the reality of the human condition. But sometimes you do think, has it gone too far in terms of the have and have nots? I don't know. What do you think?
It's quite interesting because there has been a lot of debate about capitalism, and I think that we have obviously a very nuanced form of capitalism in this country because it's a mixed economy. The state does play a major factor as 40% of the economy, etc. I think it was quite interesting because in preparation for this conversation, I thought, well, what defines me? And there's been a lot of talk recently about the Nolan principles. So the principles about public service, about selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, and things such as that. And I was revisiting them this morning. And I thought, well, what's the mantra that I've always tried to live my life by? And I think those 7 principles are probably quite spot on in terms of my approach to life. And I think that it's very difficult when you're trying to give people aspirations, when they look at some of the institutions that we rely on to do the right thing, when they're not actually living to the same bar that people would expect. And, whether that's government, whether it's Whitehall, whether it's other institutions, etc. I think the good thing about capitalism is that people actually need something to aspire to. But also they actually need to know that there's a pathway to get them to where they want to be, that it's not an impossible aspiration. What does concern me about you can't obviously switch off the internet, you can't switch off digital, etc. And I think there are major benefits of digital and platforms such as this. So the opportunity throughout the pandemic to engage digitally, we would have had no other way of actually communicating. But I think that when it's about what society's values are and how we instill those in children. And, a big part of my charitable work has been around early years. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you get it right, I think it's called the 1001 critical days, that if you get it right in the child's first 3 years of life, then their propensity to be out of employment or have contact with the criminal justice system is much heavily reduced. And I think that what we tend to do as a society is put sticking plasters over issues rather than actually the systemic change that we actually need. And, I just wonder how socially damaging things like X Factor, and everybody wants to become the next X Factor winner, and we know what happens to even the X Factor winners, but also everybody's on the show. And after a relatively short time, they fade into obscurity, don't they? And it's about I think recalibrating about what success looks like. And I guess that's quite a bigger topic, because how do we change the education system? How do we help parents become better parents? And as I said right at the beginning of this conversation, I was fortunate to be brought up in that area where both parents didn't have to go out to work, that your parents would speak to you as a child and have that interaction to develop your cognitive behavior, etc., etc. And it's about how we come up with interventions which make sure that everybody has the same level of opportunity as we've had previously. And I think we see more examples of that. I'm the product of a state school. I feel that I haven't done too badly in life, and most people are these days. And I think if you go into the professions, law, accountancy, or even the city, you wouldn't know who's come from a public school background and who actually has come from a state school background. I think the only thing where it still is an issue, I have an issue with state schools actually preparing pupils to become employees rather than the bosses. And that attitude, I've always viewed risk as a positive thing. And I think part of that is some of the life experiences that I had. So, I think that if you were to ask me what is the thing that I'm actually the most proud of in my life, it was in 2012, I set up a charity which was called the 77 Memorial Trust, which was set up to support the 800 people who were injured in the London bombings, but all the 52 families. And that came about from a local initiative here in Camden, where I live. Tavistock Square is just around the corner from where I live. I live on Tavistock Place, just off it. Most people associate the London bombings. They have that image of the bus, the roof ripped off the bus.
Yeah.
And that's a defining image because the other three were below ground. And I led a very successful fundraising campaign to raise funds to refurbish Tavistock Square, because we were aware that when people stepped off the train at Euston or King's Cross, they would come to they would probably want to pass through, or would pass through, Tavistock Place. And so we wanted to refurbish it, not only for people visiting London, but also for the 13 families who lost a loved one. We wanted to make sure that it was a place that they felt comfortable in and was welcoming, etc. And we had a very successful campaign. We refurbished the square, the gardens. We had an opening ceremony, and the representatives from the emergency services who attended the scene, the families, and they were asking for a not just a physical memorial, which we have put in the square, but also a living memorial. They wanted an annual, and we came up with the idea of an annual lecture, and that ran for 5 or 6 years. And we used to have in the BMA Great Hall about 300 people come along each year. We would ask the emergency services, police officers, fire officers, a London ambulance service to come in their livery, so the families, so they could be readily identified, even if they weren't at the site that their loved one had been injured or killed, etc. And that was a wonderful event because apart from, as I said, the memorial that sits in Tavistock Square, it was an opportunity for people, despite having all the professional counselling that they needed, to speak to people who'd been through a shared experience. And I think through talking to the people who had the family members and also those personally affected, that they were actually pleased that somebody who hadn't been directly involved in that event was actually put together a whole support network and just feeling that they were being looked after and cared for, not forgotten. I think was quite a wonderful sense of pride and achievement that we were doing that. And since then, I've now joined the governance structure of, I don't know if you've heard of the National Emergencies Trust.
No.
So the National Emergencies Trust was after Grenfell and the Manchester Arena, the Charity Commission pulled together some charities and said we need to have a voluntary sector response to when these things happen again. So the National Emergency Trust works with government, works with local authorities to make sure that if there is another Grenfell or Manchester Arena, that the response from the voluntary sector is where it needs to be, etc. And I've joined the governance structure there, and that's an extension of the work that I was doing at 7/7, because we appreciate that these events will unfortunately still continue to happen. And I think, obviously, as we've seen from the Manchester inquiry, there's a lot of things that could have been done significantly better. And I'm sure that's true of Grenfell as well, where the support just wasn't on the ground at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously involved in many what I might call projects, in a sense. So when you look at all those projects, which are quite detailed, there's a lot involved in it, pulling all the different elements together. What would you say are the key skills that you need and the key mindset that you need to be able to come up with an idea, which, let's be honest, are to a penny, but then actually to make it all happen and then wake up, say, I don't know, 3 months, 9 months, 12 months later, and it's a reality? What are the key elements that, when you think back, were critical in going on that journey and getting to the end result?
I think there is something from my own DNA. So the fact that the family that I come from, the experiences and that engagement with the wider public. I also actually have a disability, which I see as an ability. I'm actually autistic. And one of the key characteristics of somebody that is autistic is when they get hold of an idea, they do everything to the nth degree. So I would argue that if you're bringing together a project team, make sure you've got somebody with autism on the team, because they will be almost obsessive in terms of what they want to achieve and how they achieve it, and they'll see the bigger picture strategic stuff, but they'll also won't forget about the detail. So I think there is something which the key thing is about helping people and lending my support. And I think that you know, I wouldn't, you know, it was quite interesting. The chair of the or our patron of the 7/7 Memorial Trust, when we unveiled in 2018 the memorial in Tavistock Square, she described me as being an excellent conductor of the orchestra. You know, she said that, you know, it was almost,
praise indeed.
You know, it was, you know, an exemplar performance in terms of how it was all pulled together. And I think there is something about my passion around people, and actually, I feel that I've actually learned quite a lot from all the various audiences, and that I've had the pleasure to come into contact with, the people that I've had to come into contact with. I mean, it was for me, listening to the personal testimony of the families and survivors of 7/7, you can't not be affected by the personal stories of heartache. And I mean, there was one instance where one of the passengers on the bus in Tavistock Square, she was a single mother. Her children had to go into care after 7/7. The family was broken up. So there are all those unintended consequences that people wouldn't necessarily think about, the impact, longer term impact that it has. And I think that's every time I get involved in a I guess you could describe it as human tragedy. It's about how you can make their lives better, and I think that's very addictive. It's very compelling, and it's a natural human instinct, I think, to want to help and to want to use your skills. And actually, I think part of it is actually motivating the people around you to do more. And at the 7/7 Memorial Trust, we hardly had any income. If you go onto the Charity Commission, the charity we wound down recently, we begged, borrowed, and stealed. In terms, we asked for support. There's hardly any transactions or monetary transactions because everybody wants to help. It was such a compelling narrative that we were putting forward. And also, I'm very much inspired by those around me. So there was a Labour politician called Tessa Jow who died of
yes, I remember.
I think it was a brain tumour a few years ago.
Yes.
If you might remember that at the time of the London bombing, she was the only government minister in London,
Yes.
so she was
Yes.
the actual face of it.
Yes.
And although I've never met Boris Johnson, when it was the when it was the 10th anniversary, a year before the 10th anniversary in 2015, he'd asked Tessa Jow to lead a committee, a working group looking at how it was going to be commemorated. And two main events were a service at St Paul's Cathedral, and St Paul's are fantastic. You just give them a date and they do a fantastic job in organising everything. And then there was a lecture at the British Medical Association, which was broadcast to I don't know how many nations across Europe, and also much further afield, because it was quite interesting. It wasn't just a UK London event. It was obviously of international significance, given the nationality of the people that were unfortunately killed or injured. But after a year of monthly meetings, Tessa had been personally affected. So I think the parent of one of her daughter's school friends had been killed or injured in the bombing, and I saw a real sense of humility in her. At our last meeting before the commemorations, she broke down in tears. She thanked us, and I'd never seen that level of contrition or humility from a politician, and we're arguably not seeing it much these days. But it was it just reinforced everything that I saw in terms of Tessa. And when you've got people of her quality, and you see how they react, etc., it's very inspiring. It just spurs you on to want to do more, actually.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually, how's the charity sector faring, Philip? Because as I said earlier, we're recording this just at what you might call as touching every bit of wood I can, the end of the pandemic, or the seriousness, I suppose you could say, of the pandemic, not the end of it. How have charities fared during the last couple of years? Because my assumption would be that it's been a pretty damn tough couple of years. Is that the case?
No, it has been quite a tough couple of years. And I think the charity sector knows where it needs to improve. So we have all the, I guess, the super charities that everybody knows about, like Save the Children and British Red Cross, which are very well run and arguably very well resourced. There are out of 180,000 charities, I think almost 40% of them have an income of less than £10,000 a year. So there are probably, you could argue that there should be a shakeout because, what impact can those organisations have? But what I would say is that what we had seen in the run-up to the pandemic was an awful lot of innovation. There are a lot of charities out there which are about to hit £1 million in income, and similar to commercial businesses, once you hit that £1 million threshold, it's often easier to then make that transition to become a £5 million charity. And there are some organisations doing some great work out there. I think the charity sector knows, what its challenges are. I think that in terms of governance, charities are getting better in terms of trustees understanding their roles, but I think there's an awful lot that needs to be done in terms of charity governance. And also, I think that what we are seeing is, or what's benefited the charity sector, is the focus on volunteering and quality volunteering opportunities. So most people want to give their time. I think most people rather probably give their time than actually make a donation because it's a more meaningful engagement. And I think what we have seen is charities actually raising the bar in terms of the quality of the volunteering experience. And I think that that's what matters, because what the voluntary sector needs is troops on the ground. And we probably all witnessed that at a local community level. So, I live in King's Cross. I'm still working from home, as you can probably see. And I've actually, it's given me the opportunity in the last 2 years to get to know my neighbours, to get to know the people working in local shops, local supermarkets, etc., to such an extent that I wouldn't actually have been able to before, and also understand probably some of the more pressing social issues that are here locally, because previously I would go to my office, come back late, I might go to the gym, my flat was somewhere where I slept rather than somewhere where I lived, and now it's a place where I live. And so I think we're a lot more aware, a lot more connected. And I think that narrative will probably support the voluntary sector. But as I said, funding will obviously be difficult. It'll be interesting to see how much wealth has actually disappeared during the pandemic. There's obviously oligarchs seem to have kept their money, although that will be obviously frozen now. But I think that the charity sector has progressed and moved on, and I think we've seen through the pandemic, but also previous to that with food banks, etc., how they're stepping up to the mark. And, I think poster boys like Marcus Rashford and others, etc., have probably, bolstered the sector as well.
So when you're looking then, when you're recruiting for charities, particularly at senior levels, has anything changed in terms of the sorts of people you're looking for? Without putting words in your mouth, I'm just wondering whether charities now need to be perhaps more commercially aware than they might have been in the past, maybe more innovative around funding ideas rather than just the gala ball that everybody's been doing since Noah was a boy, or without being derogatory, shaking a tin outside Tesco's. Is there more of an awareness of the need for that commercial perspective and that innovation, entrepreneurial perspective, I guess, almost in the charity sector, which isn't known for that particular type of attitude or mindset? It's perceived probably more as public sector, and I stress perceived because it might not be like that. What's your experience of that been?
No, I think what we have witnessed over the last 5 or 10 years is charities actually being more aware than they ever have been before about their impact. So for every pound that they spend, actually how much is actually going on overhead and how much is actually going to the actual charitable cause that you're actually set up for. I think also what most donors want to see is most charities now have a mixed economy. So there'll be an element of earned income that may be through delivering contracts on behalf of government or local authorities, or some other consultancy support that they're able to provide. And I think that if a charity does have IP or a tangible asset that can be monetized, donors are wanting to see that that's been, sweated. In the commercial sector, we talk about sweating assets, that the assets that they have are actually being used to the fullest possible extent. And I think we're in a transition period now, but I think both charities and donors are aware of that narrative. And I think charities, in terms of making that fundraising ask, are quite keen to demonstrate the impact that they're actually having. It is an impact, and increasingly it's about systemic impact on a problem that they're having. And, there are some fantastic innovation that's being undertaken out there by the charity sector, and often the charity sector can do it at a more competitive cost structure than a commercial company or the state. So I think that we're more aware of that narrative within the charity sector. But you are right. There isn't an awful lot of actual difference between. Sorry, that was my pen dropping off the table. You'll have to edit that out.
It's okay. We're an authentic show. Pens dropping is fine. We don't need to edit that out.
That's good. I lost my train of thought then. What I was going to say is,
do you think they're sorry, I was going to say, do you think they're ready to welcome mavericks into the charity sector? I'm wondering sometimes whether, and this might be a complete perception on my part, but it's almost like that idea where it's the trustees perhaps like something a bit safer, a bit more sober. Do you think they would welcome a maverick in there, or would they a bit like going, "Whoa, this is too much"?
I think the narrative has changed quite a lot. So yeah. I think that it's quite interesting because from a legal perspective, there isn't much difference between a charity and a company, apart from the fact that charity has a much narrower focus because you're fundraising. So if you're fundraising for homelessness, you can't then actually spend it on some other activity. So that's the main difference. I think also, although I should imagine the vast majority of the more impactful charities are registered with the Charity Commission, so the large ones over £25,000 income per year, also are set up as a limited company. So they will have a trading arm within that as well. So I think there is something about people coming into the sector with stronger commercial and entrepreneurial skills, but also that consideration about what they're there to do and about that impact. So I think we've already seen that. And also, I think it's quite interesting for candidates because what we're often seeing is trustee appointments looked at as a learning and development opportunity, and most responsible employers pushing their employees to actually think about doing something within the voluntary sector. And if you go on to most corporate websites, you'll see their profiles, and they'll probably reference that they're involved in some sort of philanthropic activity. And I think there's a business imperative there, because I think customers, investors want to know that they're actually better connected. But also it enhances, it gives you a nice warm feeling about the people associated with that organization. I mean, for instance, I think BT has one of the highest volunteering rates amongst its employees. I think it's almost 50%. But they had a director of volunteering that pushed that agenda and gave their staff the opportunity to do volunteering without having to take it as annual leave or to feel that they've got to rush back to the office and do 2 days work because they've been out of the office for a day. But I think employers like BT see the benefit of that. But also we've seen, the financial services sector's had a bad rap for quite some time now, but they're one of the most philanthropic parts of the economy. And, whether it's through trustee appointments or it's the cash or benefits in kind that financial services are able to provide to the voluntary sector, they've got a stellar record within that space.
That's interesting. Actually, you should say that, because how much of an impact does the media have on this discussion, this debate? Because I'm just thinking there when you said about the financial services sector, pretty much almost every time a bank's mentioned in the media, it's usually the evil bank because they've made X billion pounds, or they're going to close 13 branches in Walthamstow, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And yet all the stuff you've just mentioned, which I guess you have a front row seat to see some of the stuff that they're doing, never gets any kind of mention. I guess that's a media agenda thing, is it?
Well, it's a media agenda, but it also is something difficult for the financial services organisations to counter. So I think what we saw with the financial crisis back in 2008 was the fact that these organisations were too big to fail. For a number of years after the financial crisis, the banks were actually being provided with free money that they would then charge. It was less, I think the interest rate they would charge was less than zero. So they were actually being given money, which they were then lending out. And if you had a credit card which was paying 20% or 30% interest, then you would probably feel a little bit aggrieved that your bank was being given, effectively being given away cash, but they were too big to fail. And also, it's in my small village, which only has 2,000 resident population of 2,000 when I was growing up, we had 3 banks. And the staff and the banks had been working there for years, so they all knew you. They didn't, when you went for a loan application, they didn't have to refer to some algorithm to see whether you should have it. They would do it because they knew you, they knew your family, etc. They knew your personal circumstance. And so I can understand that narrative. And we've almost, it's very difficult for the banks to actually put a narrative against that, because what's the alternative? Do we let them fail and the whole financial system crashes? But I think that Lloyds Bank has its own foundation. RBS was always active in there. Barings, before one of their derivatives traders obviously went a bit rogue, was always, and I think the Baring Foundation still goes, etc. So I think that I think they're an easy target. And I'm not saying that they're not an unjust target, but they're an easy target because there's lots of things that the financial services sector can't do because it's just how they're structured.
And what sort of impact then has things like comic relief and children in need had? Because it always strikes me that these are big Goliath activities for a few days where literally quite often hundreds of millions of pounds are raised. I sometimes think maybe, and please challenge me on this, that sometimes our subconscious mindset, if not our conscious mindset, is, oh, I've given £20 to charity this month, or I've given £20 to charity. That's my tick box done for the quarter. I can relax. I'll go to heaven, or whatever it might be. Yeah. Is there a tendency therefore for the children in need and the Goliath and comic relief, the Goliath kind of activities to, I don't like saying suck some of the opportunity out of the smaller charities, but I think you can see where I'm coming from.
No, I can do, and I think that it's a very mixed narrative there, because I think that if we looked at the giving rates before the pandemic, they were steadily increasing. So, and I think what's probably going to help smaller charities is the focus on community during the pandemic. So we all know, we'll sit in by the TV, we'll want to get involved in comic relief and all these other big fundraising initiatives. It's a fun thing to do. We want to phone up and Flip Nelson from King's Cross has donated £50 and all things such as that, or your local radio station or things such as that. I think what's the pandemic has been difficult, but there will be some positive things that come out of the pandemic. And I think that I'm more aware of the voluntary and social organizations in my locality, and I will probably do what I can to support them. So I think our knowledge and understanding of the voluntary sector is always increasing. I think the evidence is that some of these big showpiece annual events that we have probably enhance people's propensity to give. But also, again, it's when I was at school, there was no talk of social action. When I went to university, it was all about going to the uni bar and drinking. There were no skills development, volunteering opportunities. Whereas, if you went to university today, there'd be 101 charitable volunteering opportunities that you can do. So that notion of actually engaging in voluntary and philanthropic activities wasn't there in my age, but children and young people are being educated in that. So they're getting involved at an earlier stage. They might start, setting up direct debit as soon as they leave university and start their first job. It might just sit there. So I think that as a society, it's evolving and it's moving forward. And as I said, although we've been very aware of what's happening at a national and international level, I think the pandemic will probably be good for local voluntary and social organisations.
Yeah, I think it's all really interesting stuff. I'm just going to move slightly onto a more practical level now. Obviously, you're heavily involved in recruitment, as you've said. What sort of advice might you give to somebody who's, shall we say, at the tipping point of thinking, yes, I love my nice fancy car. Yes, I love my big salary, but I really want to make a difference now in my life and my career. What's the best way to approach that in terms of finding the opportunities? Is it about, do you use the internet to search for those? Is it about approaching recruitment consultants like you? What's the best way to go about making that change?
It's quite interesting because I talked about earlier on where I said that people don't often have the opportunity to network as much as they would potentially want to. So they might have 2,000 LinkedIn contacts, but they may not have met any of them. And so I think there is something as a first step. It's actually doing the legwork yourself. Now, I've always been hopefully a more helpful executive search consultant, that people come to me and I will spend time with them as they bounce off ideas potentially about, they might not necessarily know what particular sector might be able to offer, and I'm able to provide them with feedback, etc. My best advice to people would be to think more strategically. Think about those causes or those subject areas which are more of interest to you, and just engage with those organizations. I mean, there is an example of somebody who wanted to leave the city. He had a stellar career. He wasn't sure about the portability of the skills and experience that he had. He was recommended to contact the CEO of Marie Curie, the cancer charity. And he said, look, I'm looking to transition from the financial services sector. I'm interested in the work that Marie Curie do. I'm not entirely sure whether my skills would be a fit. Do you have any project that I can potentially help you with or work on to broaden my understanding? And he did that on a voluntary sector basis, and now he's working within the voluntary sector.
Oh, so I'm loving that. That's a top tip, Philip, for the day. That's a brilliant idea.
It doesn't have to be, overly consuming in terms of time or resources. It's they will, if you've reached a certain level, organizations will want to engage with you. It's how you engage with them. And I think that, you can set the parameters about what time you have available, etc. But, it's the, why take a plunge into a sector when you haven't done your research? And I think there'll be with loads of organizations, whether they're commercial or charity sector organizations. I did it myself. So after 11 years of working as a recruitment consultant, I thought, do I want to continue working for a plethora of different organizations, or do I want to work for a single organization? And there's an education charity called Teach First, and which are obviously one of the probably the largest, most successful education charities in the country. And I've been recruiting from them when there was only 3 or 4 people in the office years ago. And I wrote to them and said, look, I'm thinking about making the transition.
Yeah.
I was probably, I was in my late 30s. I was probably the oldest intern they'd ever had, unpaid intern. I said, can I come and work with you for 6 weeks just to get a feel? And it was quite interesting because what I did discover is that there was that opportunity. I have the portability of the skills, but then I decided after 6 weeks, I love the variety of dipping into different organizations, numerous conversations. But, you know, that was well worth it for me, because it reinforced that I'm passionate and love the industry that I'm in. And even if it only serves to perform that purpose, then it's useful, isn't it?
It's interesting you should mention that about transferable skills, because I'm a part of what I do in my business is coaching. And I have, and this isn't just with clients, coaching clients, I've also had the conversations with relatives and friends. They seem to struggle to understand about the whole concept of transferable skills. They think of themselves as, I don't know, they work for a mobile phone company, and they think, oh, well, I only know mobile phones. And they seem to struggle to all those different, you know, leadership, communication skills, problem solving skills, decision making skills. Do you think that's common? Is my experience common in that area?
No, I think it's very common, because what people don't have is the space to reflect. So often, you know, it's when you're going into an organization doing recruitment, you're also a little bit of a counselor in terms of what's going on, you know, what's working well, what still needs to be fixed, etc. And what I'm always amazed at is how CEOs and senior leaders don't put a time aside during the week just to actually walk around the office, just to not necessarily, they might consider they're not doing anything, but just walking around, engaging, going to speak to a receptionist, going to speak to other people around the business, and not actually have their time, you know, have unstructured time available, thinking space available. And I think, you know, it's true of any industry that the more senior you become, the amount of unstructured time that you have is increasingly limited or non-existent. And I think people need that, because otherwise it's similar to what you've just described. People actually don't understand just how good they are at strategy, just how good they are at communicating a narrative to various audiences, etc. And, you know, it's you know, I appreciate it's very difficult for some organizations. It might be financial constraints, other constraints where everybody's working you know, more hours than they're contractually obliged to or would want to, But I would say, you know, that's a core skill that you need to manage. You need to look after your own self, and you need to understand what's going on around you, not just have, you know, one meeting after the next. And I think the better leaders and will probably factor that into their weekly diary.
Brilliant. Okay, then finally, Philip, then put you on a little bit on the spot. Great experience, fabulous stories and experiences, and I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface. Is there anything now that you can think of that you would like to achieve before you pass on to the next coil of existence? Is there anything specific that you think, yes, I would like to say, yes, you know, I have achieved that between now and then?
Gosh, that is a difficult question, isn't it?
I know it would be.
But also a very interesting question as well, because I think as an individual, as I get older, I'm becoming more comfortable with myself. and more relaxed. And what I want to be, and what I've noticed is that if I'm in that mindset, I'm actually able to achieve so much more. You're more receptive to what's going on around you. And that's, you know, I'm quite excited about the future, what will come. I've been an employee for other people for 30 years. And then in October last year, I've decided to set up my own executive search firm. And, you know, it's like being released from prison or something. Not saying that, you know what I mean? It's just,
yeah,
so,
been there, done that.
It's just, I just feel as though I've been given a new lease of life. And then things that were happening around me that I hadn't noticed before, I'm actually more, you know, receptive to. And so, you know, I don't know what will come next, but I'm quite excited about what will come next, because I've actually given myself the bandwidth to grow. And I think a lot of us don't necessarily give ourselves that bandwidth to grow and develop and evolve. And so, you know, and it goes back to that what I said a few moments ago about having the opportunity to be reflective, to understand who we are and our self-worth, etc. So, as I said, although I don't know what's around the corner, I'm quite excited that it's going to be better potentially than what's gone before.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer. And thanks very much for joining me today, Philip, on Passions. It's been really, really enjoyable listening to you and talking to you. One of the great things about doing this is I always end up with takeaways from every interview I do. It's like a mini training course in a sense, from people just giving their insights, and just gets you thinking and makes you wonder, and is there an opportunity there, and how can I improve myself and make myself the best I can be? And that's been no difference today. So thanks ever so much for joining me today, and obviously all the very best with your future. And I hope you don't miss the wages fairy too much. The wages fairy sometimes.
Can I ask you a question? Is this the first Phil and Phil show that you've done?
I'm not sure if it is, but do you know what? The two Ronnies have gone now, so I think there's an opportunity. The two Baldies, the two Phils, the two bald Phils, double whammy. I think it's a definite opportunity. In fact, when I asked you the question, I'm very disappointed that you didn't say to do a show, Phil, with you called The Two Baldies. You could have said that. That was an opportunity. You missed it.
That can be a new project we can work on anyway. But lovely to talk to you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. That's been brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think what you said is very true about networks. And I always say to people, you know, if you ever have the confidence to do interviews with people, it's a wonderful way to meet people, a wonderful way to get to know people. And now, certainly, sir, you are now in my network, I'm pleased to say. And maybe when I'm allowed out of Manchester, I think we're not far off. Then hopefully we can maybe grab a drink and a catch up in the real world sometime in London.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thanks very much, Philip. Thank you.